I need some traction. You need some traction.
Great. Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you guys. I'm super excited. What an awesome venue, huh? This is great. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about how to create products for growth. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of talks today about optimizing metrics. My talk will hopefully set the foundation for a lot of that. Real quick about my background. So I started out with a technical background. I moved to Silicon Valley to get an MBA, and I've been out there ever since. And shortly after getting into product management, I realized UX design and coding is really important, so I made it a point to learn that. I spent a bit of time at Intuit in product management, leading the Quicken team. I've also been CEO and co-founder of my own startup, a personalized news startup called Your Version that launched at TechCrunch. We won the People's Choice Award. These days, I consult to companies and help them basically create products for growth and achieve product market fit and grow good product teams. Some of my clients you can see are Box, Facebook, Microsoft, Medallia. I also, a little over 2 years ago, started a monthly meetup group in Palo Alto that focuses on product and UX design. My Twitter handle is @Dan_Olsen, and I try to cover a lot of material, so don't try to break your wrist trying to take notes. I'll post it all on SlideShare, I promise, okay? And to set the stage for this, basically, what I see is when people are trying to build a new product or improve a product, there's really three fundamentally different phases that are out there. There's basically before product market fit, and within that, there's actually two different parts. There's the first part, which I call phase one, which is actually before your product is live, and maybe some of you are in that stage. And then there's after you launch your product, but you still haven't achieved product market fit. And then there's the phase three, where actually you've achieved product market fit. And basically, to kind of draw it graphically, you could just talk about revenue or number of customers, whatever you want, from 0 to a lot, whatever a lot means for your business. And this is pretty much roughly the shape of the curve. Before you launch, you obviously have 0 customers. When you launch, but you don't have product market fit, it doesn't really take off. Then after you have product market fit and start optimizing it, it really takes off like a rocket ship. And what I see people do is a lot of times you'll get advice, and someone will say, oh, this is what you should be doing, and they're giving you advice that's not relevant to the phase that you're in. And the biggest thing that I see is a key fundamental difference between quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches when you're trying to learn about your customers and about what they want. And so quantitative is basically when you've got a lot of people and you're doing A/B testing or you're doing surveys and you're dealing with a high number of people and you're trying to prove things, statistically significant differences. And so it's all about analytics and logic and data. And so I like to just quantify this by the person that's like the master of analytics and logic, so Spock. So basically the Spock approach is like the analytical quantitative approach. But when you have a new product, you don't have millions of customers. You can't really run statistically significant A/B tests, and it's really important to get in there in the details and really talk with people and understand what's going on. And so that's more of a qualitative approach, and talking to users, interviewing them, really understand what makes them tick. And so who's the master of doing that? It's Oprah, basically. So I call this like the Spock approach versus the Oprah approach. Now just think about what you prefer. Who here would say they're more of a quantitative? They prefer quantitative learning methods. Just raise your hand. Who prefers more qualitative? Wow, that's a pretty good mix. A lot of people I know, there tends to be a bigger skew for quantitative. So anyway, going back to our diagram, let's talk about what the goal should be in each of these phases. What's a high-level goal in each of these phases? So in phase one, before we're live, and before obviously we don't have product market fit, our goal is to test our hypotheses and basically gain confidence before we invest in building too much of our product. And the methods there are mainly qualitative. We don't yet have thousands or millions of users to go do these A/B tests on yet. And we don't truly understand who our users are either. In the second phase, it's really about improving our product market fit. We've launched now, but we haven't yet achieved product market fit. And here you can use a mix. Both are very important. And really in phase three, after you've achieved product market fit, that's when your main objective is growth, which is what a lot of this conference is about, obviously. And that's where so you may get advice where it's mainly quantitative. You may get advice from certain entrepreneurs or people in companies about how to do A/B testing and things like that, where they're in phase three. But if you're in phase one, it's not going to really work out for you that well. So let's do a quick show of hands here for phase 1, 2, or 3. Who here has got a product that's not live yet? Raise your hands. Okay, great. Who's in phase 2? You've launched it, but you haven't quite achieved product market fit yet. Okay, and who's in phase 3? We've got product market fit, we're just growing, pour gasoline on the fire. Okay, great, so we got a good mix, great. So because there's different techniques for different phases, that's part of why I wrote this book, The Lean Product Playbook, that basically walks through how to start out with the Oprah technique, and then once you've launched, transition to the Spock technique and use both of those basically methodologies. I'm going to give 2 copies of the book away. So the way to win a copy, if you want, is just on Twitter. Just include my handle at Dan Olsen. I'll give one away for the best tweet, and I'll give one away like a lottery random tweet. So let's talk about product market fit. I kind of mentioned it, but we didn't really get into it. The interesting thing about product market fit, and a lot of these kind of buzzwords that are out there, this one's a funny one. If you Google it, you'll see people talking about it like, oh yeah, so-and-so has product market fit. So-and-so does not have product market fit. But you'd be really hard-pressed to find an article that actually tells you how to actually achieve it. It's just talking about it like a matter of fact, you have it or not. And so that's why I wrote the book, and that's what led me to develop a framework for product market fit. I call the product market fit pyramid. Let me walk you through that. So the bottom part is the market. It's your bottom two layers of the pyramid. It's your target customer. Everything starts with who are we trying to build this for, and what are their underserved needs. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. And your product is the top three layers of the pyramid. It's what's your value proposition? How is our product better? How does it meet the needs better or differently than the other products that are out there? What's our feature set or functionality? And what's our user experience? And so you have the market on the bottom, the product on the top. Product market fit is just how well does what you're building at the top fit with what the market needs are. And so once I developed this framework, I realized that this is really just a bunch of hypotheses that you need to test and iterate on and improve to achieve product market fit. I turned this into a process where we basically step-by-step walk through this. So we identify what are our hypotheses about our target customer, what do we think their underserved needs are, what's our value proposition, how are we going to meet those needs better or differently than the competition, what's our feature set, and this is where MVP comes in, right? We don't want to overbuild our V1 product until we validated it enough. And then finally, user experience design, which is what brings the functionality to life. Now, once you have a UX design, now you can actually go out and do a sixth step, which is test with customers. And that's how you actually assess where you're at with product market fit. And this is an iterative process. And so this is a variant of the build, measure, learn loop that I created that I prefer, where it starts out with hypothesizing. You're forming hypotheses. You're coming up with designs on how you can test those hypotheses. You test the hypotheses, you learn, and then you revise your hypotheses. So as you're working through that pyramid of product market fit, we're doing this iterative process. So let me give you a quick overview of the process, and then I'll share a case study as well. It starts with determining your target customer, and this may seem a little daunting or scary. If you're working on a new product, you may not have a really good sense, and that's okay. You can form a tentative hypothesis because it's so closely related to the underserved needs that you're going to be iterating both those layers kind of concurrently. But let me show an example of why it's so important. And we're going to be talking a lot about customer needs and customer benefits in my talk. But let's talk about a need that pretty much probably most of us have, most people have, which is transportation. You know, we need to get around, say, within 100 miles of our home to go to work, to go to school, to go to the store, whatever it is. So there's a lot of us that share that high-level need. But if we just stop at that level, it's really not getting specific enough. The second we start talking about specific target customers or persona, then you basically see how it leads to very distinct needs and distinct products. So let's say, for example, on the one hand, we have a soccer mom versus a speed demon. They both have the need to get around 100 miles from their home, right? But say we interviewed 15 or 20 of each of these personas, and we said, hey, what's important to you? You know, what's important to you when you're going around, getting to your home and transporting around? If we talk to the soccer moms, we might hear things like, well, what's important to you? Making sure my car is big enough to carry my kids and their gear, safety, fuel economy, things like that might be what we hear. If we talk to the speed demon, we're not going to hear any of that stuff. We're going to hear, hey, how fast does the car go? Does it look cool? And more importantly, does it make me look cool when I'm driving it, right? And as a result, you end up with very different products. And I like to talk about the car industry because transportation is a need that a lot of people have. And you end up, think of all the different flavors and shapes of cars that are out there, right? They've gotten really clear on the target market and their use cases and needs. All right, so once we have and persona, by the way, are a great tool to use to capture your assumptions about your target customer. Once we have our initial hypothesis, then we want to identify what are their underserved needs. And when we talk about customer needs, an important concept that I've found that helps really get clear in how you think about it is problem space versus solution space. Who's heard of problem space versus solution space before? Anybody? A few hands, that's good. Okay, you're starting to hear more about it. So let me explain it real quick. Problem space is basically, if we're talking about a customer problem or a customer need or a customer benefit that our product should address. So it could be a well-written requirement or it could be a well-written agile user story. But what it's not is it's not in the solution space. Solution space is actually a specific implementation desired to address that need. So if we actually go and code a product, that's in the solution space. If we go and design a mock-up or a wireframe, that's in the solution space. If we're talking in the abstract about, hey, we should build a product that's going to help people, make it easier for people to share photos with their friends, then that's in the problem space. And there are plenty of companies that just jump right into solution space, either with designing or coding, without getting clear on who's this for and what needs are we trying to solve with it. And the example that I like to use to illustrate this is when NASA was sending astronauts into space, they knew that basically the ballpoint pens we use here wouldn't work because they rely on gravity. And so it wasn't NASA. NASA didn't do this, but there was a contractor for NASA called Fisher, and NASA didn't ask him to do it, but Fisher said, you know what, I think we can invent a pen that's going to write in space. And they spent $1 million in R&D, and they invented a space pen. So these are pretty cool. Hopefully some of you guys have seen these. So they work in space, and they work great in zero gravity. I haven't verified it myself, but I believe it. Faced with the same challenge, the Russian space agency sent their cosmonauts into space with pencils. And you can actually get a Russian space pen. It's a tongue-in-cheek joke. It's just a pencil in a box, right? So the funny thing here is just like, a couple of lessons here why I like this story. One is, obviously, if these both are equally acceptable to meet the needs, then the one that didn't take $1 million and all that time is obviously higher ROI and better, right? The second thing is, by saying, hey, our requirement is that we need a pen that writes in space, let's analyze that a little bit. By saying pen that writes in space, that word pen, you've kind of polluted your problem space statement with some solution space stuff already. And that happens all the time. Even if people don't jump in and code, they will write their requirements or talk about what they need to do in feature speak or solution speak, right? A more abstract way to say it would be, hey, we need a way to write in space, that's solution agnostic. You could even go further and say, hey, why writing? Why not just a way to take notes and refer to them later? Maybe we have some crazy voice recording Siri thing that works for us or something, right? So that's the lesson learned from this. Now, the reality is, it turns out that the pen is way better than the pencil in space because that little lead tip can break off in zero gravity. It can get in people's eyes and electronics. By the way, that's made of wood. It can burn in an oxygen-rich cabin. So I'm not trying to say that. And somebody here will likely Google this and end up on Snopes.com, and it'll say that, no, this is an urban legend. It's not an urban legend. The urban legend is that NASA paid $1 million. It wasn't NASA, it was Fisher. So anyway, it's a good story to be mindful of problem space versus solution space. Let me illustrate it with more of a software product example. We'll do problem space on the left, solution space on the right. I used to work at Intuit for Quicken. Another big product we had was TurboTax. Actually, I don't know, in Canada, they use TurboTax in Canada or not? All right, cool, good. All right. So it's a product, so it's in the solution space. It competes with another product, TaxCut. And if we had, what you can do is you can map back and forth. We say, great, if we, at a high level, what's the benefit? What do you guys think the benefit that these products provide in the problem space is? Anybody? Huh? Get your taxes done, right. And that's what's funny is you guys would all use slightly different words for it, and the problem space is messy like that. So something like prepare my taxes, help me do my taxes, something like that, right? And when I was at Intuit, Scott Cook helped me understand this concept too. He would, whenever he had like a group of product managers around, he'd like quiz us and go, hey, who's the biggest competitor for TaxCut? And everyone would raise their hand and go, TaxCut. He's like, no, you're wrong. It's pen and paper. Because at the time, there were more Americans doing their taxes with pen and paper, right? And so the other thing about having a clear definition of the problem space, you really understand what are the substitutes and alternatives for your product. Now, once you have a software product, it can do a lot more things than just prepare my taxes. And just like that target customer example, you can't just stay at that surface level. You got to peel the onion and get more detailed, right? And so the things it can do, it can help you check your taxes. Computers are great at math, right? It can file your taxes. Instead of having to go in line at the post office, you can just push a button and file it online. It can walk you through a questionnaire and ask you, some questions to try to maximize your deductions. It can flag things, analyze your return, say, hey, this looks a little risky for audit. So there's a lot of these things that we can do. And as product people, what you want to do is brainstorm all those things in the problem space, end up with a very rich definition of what the benefits that your customers do want. Now, if you follow my advice, you end up with like tens or dozens of these problems that you could solve for customers. And now that brings up the issue of prioritization because we can't possibly address them all for people. And the best framework that I've seen to prioritize customer needs is importance versus satisfaction. So let me illustrate this. We'll do importance on the vertical axis from low to high. It's like, how important is this user need, right? A given, your need to use Instagram versus someone else's need to use Facebook might be higher or lower. That's what we mean by need. Like, how important is that to you specifically? And then on the x-axis is the satisfaction with the current alternatives from low to high. And let's just put this into 4 quadrants so we can talk about them, the 4 quadrants. Now, the bottom left quadrant is low importance, low satisfaction. And the bottom right is low importance, high satisfaction. At the end of the day, neither of these are worth going after, really. Like, if you're about to embark on a venture or a new product and you have all these resources, these precious resources, why would you go after a low importance need, right? You wouldn't do it. And so usually people don't do it on purpose. They just don't realize because they didn't do the proper research until after the fact that they were addressing a low importance need that other people didn't care about. In the upper right, we have high importance of user needs, so that's better. But we also have high satisfaction with what's out there. So this is basically a competitive market. the first thing I think about here is like internet search. Like, and people don't walk around going, gosh, I can't find a thing on this Google. It just completely stinks. I can't find anything, right? It's pretty good. Like you can find what you need. And there are other markets like that, like all-in-one printers. They all look about the same, right? It's kind of a commodity product. So you hear about people saying you need to be 10x better. That's what they're talking about. If you're going to try to go into this quadrant when there's already someone up here, you need to be 10x better. In the book I talk about, has anyone here ever heard of a startup called Cool back in the day? They tried to take on Google and lost. And anyway, they were going after that quadrant. Now, the upper left quadrant is high importance of user need and low satisfaction. So that's where there's a real opportunity to create a lot of customer value. And these opportunities do exist. So the example I talk about in the book is Uber. So Uber's done a lot of things right as to why they've been so successful. They've done a great job building their product, marketing, growing drivers, growing users. But I think a big fundamental reason why they've been so successful is that they fundamentally addressed an upper left quadrant need. You can imagine if you just surveyed a bunch of people that took taxis and asked them how satisfied they were with their rides, how safe it was, how clean the cab was, how friendly the cabbie was, how easy it was to pay, all those things, how there'd be low satisfaction. Now, the beauty of this framework that I like is it's meant to be a visual framework. So if you have a product that's meeting a certain need with a certain level of satisfaction, what I'm saying is the area of that rectangle is a measure of how much customer value that product creates. And if there's another product that addresses a higher importance need with a higher level of satisfaction, it creates that much more value. And you can think about if you have an existing product, you can create more customer value basically by moving to the right and growing satisfaction with how well you meet those needs. And that's why the upper left quadrant represents the biggest opportunity. Now, if this seems kind of theoretical and abstract, let me show you some real data from a product that I worked on. We had 13 key features, and we surveyed our users and asked them to quantitatively rate importance and satisfaction. And this is the data that we got. There are 13 data points. Each of those data points is one of our features. And basically, you can see the satisfaction level is what's next to the point. So the first thing I saw was up here. I'm like, hey, this is great. We're doing a killer job. 100% importance, 98 satisfaction. Great. My second thought was, great, I don't need to spend any engineering resources on that. Let me just go put them on something else. And this is the point that popped out because it's up here in the upper left, right? It's relatively high importance, low satisfaction. So we can go after that. And that helps us prioritize, again, to add the most customer value. If you like the idea of getting quantitative about importance and satisfaction, in addition to my book, I recommend checking out What Customers Want by Anthony Olwick. He has another similar approach to that. Has anyone here heard of the Kano model before? So you're hearing more about this too. I actually learned about this when I studied lean manufacturing before I moved to Silicon Valley. It's another way to think about user needs and satisfaction. In his model, on the vertical axis, we go from the user being completely dissatisfied to being completely satisfied. And then on the horizontal axis, from the need not being met at all to the need being fully met. And the beauty of his framework is there's only 3 types or categories of needs or features. Let me walk you through them. The first is performance, and this is pretty easy to understand. More is better, less is worse. So say you were shopping for a car, and there were 2 cars, and they look pretty much the same, but then you suddenly realize that car B had twice the fuel economy of car A. You would pick car B because fuel economy is a performance feature, right? For chips, this is like CPU speed. For search engines, it might be relevant. So this is literally a performance benefit where more is better. The second one is must-haves. Now, having a must-have doesn't actually cause anyone to be happy, but not having a must-have makes them unhappy, right? So sticking with cars, say you saw some car in the showroom and it looked great, and you looked at the sticker on the window, and you said, wow, the torque is great, everything looks great, these specs look great. But then you peeked inside and you realized it didn't have any seatbelts. You wouldn't buy it, right? Because seatbelts are a must-have. But if car A had 5 seatbelts and car B had 100 seatbelts, you wouldn't say car B is 20 times better, right? Once you have one seatbelt per person, the must-have has been checked off. The third category is delighters. So not having a delighter doesn't cause any problem because people aren't expecting it. But by having the delighter, you can really create a lot of customer satisfaction. Sticking with cars, not now, but years ago when the first GPS cars came out, that was a big delighter. Before that, people were getting lost or printing out Google Maps, asking for directions. And then once GPS came out, they just put in their address and it just got them from point A to point B. It changed how they drove. But as you guys know, GPS is more common these days and we have it on our phones. And that illustrates an important concept that basically things migrate over time, right? So yesterday's delighters become today, performance features become tomorrow's must-have. And the rate with which that happens depend on the level of competition and innovation in your category. But that's a way we can classify our user needs. And we're actually going to use it in the next step to define our value proposition. So what is a value proposition? Out of all those benefits that we could provide, which ones are we actually going to bite off and try to deliver for our customers? And for those benefits, how are we going to be better? How are we going to be better than the competition? And what I like to do, this is where I like to use the Kano model, And what you can do is create a table like this, and I've kept it generic so you can imagine your product in there, where you just list the must-haves for your product category. You list the performance benefits for you and your competitors, and you list the delighters that are there. And then what you do is you make a column for each of your key competitors, and you make a column for yourself. And then you go through and you score or evaluate each of your competitors, right? So say we do this. Of course, they both have the must-haves. These guys are better at this performance benefit. B is better at this performance benefit. They're both so-so at this one, and delighter benefit. These guys have a delighter benefit. With that backdrop, we're not going to fight everybody on every dimension. We can't afford to do that, right? And it also leads to not being differentiated. So given this backdrop, we basically decide to do this. We're going to have the must-have, of course, basically. We're going to, instead of trying to fight A on performance benefit 1, we're going to be okay at it. We're going to go ahead and seed performance benefit 2 and not worry about that right now. And we're going to try to be the best at performance benefit 3. Maybe we've identified some market segment where that's really important, that's underserved. Maybe we've got some technological advantage or some feature ideas for how we can better meet that need. And then we have a delighter here. At the end of the day, the things that separate your product and make it special are not the must-haves. It's the performance benefits where you plan to outperform significantly, and your unique delighters. And this is basically the essence of product strategy, right? If your team or your sales team is out there and customers go, hey, is your product going to do this? Yep. Is your product going to do this? Yes, 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 yes. Strategy means saying no, right? And in the book, I mentioned a Steve Jobs quote where he says, for every yes when they make design decision, there's 1,000 no's. So this is the essence of product strategy, and very few teams do it. So this is how we get clear on how our product's going to be better or different. Next step is to get clear. We still, this whole time, I don't know if you've noticed, we've been in the problem space. We haven't talked about features yet or UI at all. Now's where we transition into, great, now that we're clear on our value proposition, what should our feature set be? And this is where the concept of MVP comes in. We don't want to boil the ocean. We don't want to have a team of engineers heads down for 18 months coding something, come out of the cave, launch it, and realize nobody wanted what we just built, right? That's the whole idea of an MVP. So, does anyone here, what do you guys think an MVP is? Anyone here have a definition they like? Just yell it out. Bare bones prototype. Okay, interesting, good. Okay, that's a good one. So the bare bones part gets at this, the main reason MVP, the whole reason for an MVP is to avoid making the mistake of overbuilding before you validate. That's the number one mistake. And what's funny is even though that's the goal of it, some people still overbuild their MVP. The second mistake I see people make, let me explain it here, with this framework, basically. This comes from, if anyone's read, Aaron Walters from Mailchimp wrote a great book called Designing for Emotion, and a designer friend of mine modified it, so I just want to give those guys props. But there's a way to think about a product in four layers, another pyramid, where it's like, hey, how functional is it? How reliable is it? How usable is it? How delightful is it? And I love that in the last several years, you hear much more about delight and delighting customers and delightful user experiences. About 10 years ago, there was a big focus on usability. And usability answers the question, can people use your product? Delight is much more about, do they actually want to use your product? What kind of emotion does it evoke? And what you can do is kind of say, okay, that's the backdrop. Let's fill in the pyramid for how much that product actually delivers on each of those layers. And the second biggest mistake I see people make with MVPs is they don't build the whole pyramid, which is the whole point of not doing an MVP. But what they do is they do this. They only build a subset of functionality, which is great because you don't want to build all the functionality. But they use MVP and this kind of bare bones as an excuse to say, you know what, it's an MVP. It's okay if it's buggy. It's an MVP. It's okay if people can't use it. We'll do the UX design later. Don't worry about it. We'll make it delightful later. How do you think an MVP like this tests when you test it with customers? It's not going to test well, right? So it's true that you don't want to build the whole pyramid. You only want to bite off a slice. But what you want to do instead is for the part that you're going to do, and I'm not trying to say be a perfectionist here, make it reliable enough, make it usable enough and delightful enough, right? And so in the book, I have a lot more about how to break down your feature set into feature chunks and things like that and decide what's in your MVP. I don't have time to get into that now. Once we're clear on what our MVP functionality is, the next step is actually to create a prototype so that we can actually bring it to life. At the end of the day, a feature set is just words on paper until we actually create a user experience. And the best metaphor I've created that I like for UX design is basically an iceberg. Because just like an iceberg, there's a little bit that's visible above the water, and that's what you see, but it's misleading because there's a lot more going on beneath the surface that you don't see. And that part above the water that we all see is visual design. That's what most people see and react to, right? Right now, you guys are taking in my talk, mainly visually, somewhat through your ears, but think about most of the information you take in is through your eyes and visually, right? Shapes, colors, fonts, things like that. But when you use a product that has product market fit and it's delightful, it's because the product team has thought about these more foundational layers. And I don't have time to go in depth, but real quick, conceptual design is like, what's the fundamental approach to how we're going to design this product? And I talk about the example of Uber, not because they had a map-centric UI. There are a lot of apps out there that have map-centric UIs, but because they decided, their conceptual design was, before they even drew anything, is, hey, let's show the user's location, and let's show the cars, all real time on the map in relation to the user's location, and show them how long it's going to take. That's our conceptual design. And the cool thing, if you guys remember the first time you ever used Uber, that UI was so powerful, it just instantly conveyed their value prop. You knew right away, oh wow, I know when the car's going to come, I can see what's going on. So that's conceptual design. Information architecture has to do with how you organize and structure the information in your product. If you're looking for things and can't find them, the labels and navigation don't make sense, they've done a poor job. If in contrast, when you go to look for something, it's where you expect it to be and you can easily navigate around, they've done a good job. Interaction design is literally how the user and your product interact with each other. Navigation, anything they can click or tap, forms, controls, things like that. And again, if you're using a good product, it's because the team has done a lot of good work at these other layers. When you're going to create a UX design, there's a range of options. You use the word prototype. Prototype's a nice umbrella term that can mean a lot of things. And I like to categorize the design deliverables you can create or artifacts you can create by interactivity over here. Interactivity is how much can you click or tap on it like the real final end product. And fidelity, to what extent does it resemble, how closely does it resemble the final end product, right? And so in the bottom left, the lowest interactivity, lowest fidelity, we have the awesome hand sketch. Whether it's on paper, or whether it's on a whiteboard. This is a great tool for teams to just get their initial thoughts about UX design out there and iterate them quickly, right? Not necessarily good enough to show to customers to get feedback, but great tool, starting point. And so what I'm going to show you here is not only the deliverables, but what I see as a very common, very good workflow to kind of work through your design progressively and de-risk it before you actually go and code. And that's kind of, I didn't say it explicitly, but there's a lot of de-risking and validation you can do before you actually code, and I'll show you that in the case study. So once the team's happy with hand sketches, usually then they switch to doing clickable or tappable wireframes. Now wireframes are higher fidelity than sketches, but they're not high as fidelity as mockups. And sometimes people use those terms interchangeably, but wireframes is usually reserved for lower fidelity. And has anyone here used Balsamic? Keep your hand up. Are you happy with Balsamic? Some people put it down. Most people kept it up. So it's a great, easy tool, to just kind of get an idea out on paper. Because the other thing that is important when you get to this point is up until now we've been talking about words and concepts, and the whole time, say we were doing a photo sharing app, and we agreed on the value prop, and we agreed on the MVP feature set. I've got this picture in my head of what it's going to look like. You've got a picture in your head of what it's going to look like. I guarantee those pictures are not the same. So the second we start drawing, then we can get on the same page. And then basically, the team should iterate on these until they're happy with them. And then you can actually test those. Those are usually good enough to test with customers to get a sense for how we're doing on information architecture and interaction design, or the things missing that they expect to be there. Once you're happy there, you can move to clickable mockups. Mockups now are more like pixel perfect, higher fidelity. The other thing I forgot to say about wireframe, usually in wireframes, you don't worry about color. You don't worry about the visual design aspects. You don't worry about the font. You don't worry about the images too much and things like that. It's really much more about those other layers. Now in mockups, we are putting in color, fonts, things like that. It's higher fidelity. And again, you can get clickable, tappable. So has anyone here used InVision? So InVision is growing in popularity. The beauty of InVision is before, your visual designer would send you a zip file with like 30 different JPEG files of all the different pages, and you have to figure out how to test with that. Now, as a non-technical person, non-designer, you can upload those images to InVision. You can say, okay, I'm going to create a little rectangle around this button. When they click on this button, it's going to go to this one. And you can click together a tappable, clickable experience. And you can't do every possible path, but you can do the happy path. And it's a great way to get feedback. If you're doing that with high-fidelity mockups, you can get a lot of great feedback. And then you basically iterate until you get enough positive customer feedback and a lack of negative feedback. And then you can proceed to actually moving to your live product. And if you follow this path, you can feel pretty confident. If that tested well, your clickable, tappable mockups tested well, you can feel really confident that what your engineers are about to build is going to be high value versus throwaway work. But even once you launch, you should still test, because things can get lost in translation. There can be performance issues, browser-specific issues, things like that. Okay? Now, once you have your prototype, the next thing to do now is to close the loop between product and market and go and test with customers. And I don't have time to get into it. In the book, I talk about, I used to work at Intuit, which had like $1 million usability lab with one-way mirrors and cameras all over. You don't need all that fancy stuff. You can do just what I call ramen usability, where it's you and the user and their laptop or their device. And in the book, I talk about that. But let me walk you through a case study where I basically applied this process from end to end. You can see the results and how it works. So I had a client that had an idea for a product called marketingreport.com. They were a small startup. It was a small team, me, the CEO, their head of marketing, and a designer. And they didn't have a big engineering team, but the CEO wanted to explore this new business idea that he had. And as a result of having small engineering, he basically said there's no coding. You cannot code. We have to validate as much as we can without coding. So I was game for that because I really like to follow the approach I just showed you. Now the idea, let me explain a little bit, was a marketing report. So we all get direct mail or junk mail, right? So I may get something that says, hey, here's a coupon for cat litter, but I don't have a cat. Why did I get this thing? I got this thing because in some database somewhere, they think that Dan has a cat, and they sent me that, right? So it's a lot of parallels to the basic credit business, where it's like, hey, if you go to apply for a credit card or a loan and you get declined, why is that? Well, because in some database somewhere you can't see, there's some credit history and some credit score, and they say, hey, you didn't pay your bills before. So it's basically a similar kind of parallel to credit, but giving the user power and control and transparency into why you're getting the kind of junk mail that you're getting. That was the idea. And you wanted to test that basically. And so the first thing I did is say, great, let's map out the problem space and the customer benefits that we're talking about, right? And there were two execs and they had slightly different ideas, but what they agreed upon is the core of it was this idea of transparency. Find out what they know about you. What is in that marketing, what are in those marketing databases that determines the mail that you get? And the features for that in the solution space would be a marketing report, which would be like a credit report, a marketing score, which would be like a credit score, and a marketing profile that would kind of show what they thought your demographic profile was. They both agreed that was the core. But one of the executives wanted to say, you know what, maybe Dan, you don't have a cat, but you have a dog. And you can say, you know what, let me go take out the fact that I have a cat, put in the fact that I have a dog, start sending me some dog food coupons. So I can opt in for money-saving offers. He brainstormed that maybe people want to compare their spending and shopping habits with other people. And because social networking was hot at the time, social networking got added in too. Total solution space, right? There wasn't any benefit there. And then the other executive wanted to do the core green stuff, but his spin was more, you know what, no, it's not about getting relevant offers so I can save money. I just want to block the stuff that's irrelevant. Let's just reduce the junk mail, get the stuff that's irrelevant to go away or be diminished. And then we brainstormed a secondary benefit of safe trees. And we iterated this, and I drew this up. I said, great, is everyone's ideas on here? They said, yes. I said, great. I looked at it, and I was like, this is way too big to test in a single MVP or single prototype. So what we did, I proposed, I said, you know what, since the green is the core, let's create two slightly different versions. One's gonna have the core plus the reduced junk mail. We call that the shield because it was reducing your junk mail. And the other concept's gonna have the core stuff plus the saver because it's gonna focus on saving you money. And so then what we did, so we got clear on our value prop and basically what we were gonna do for each of the concepts, and we created a UX design. And I would call this like medium fidelity. We didn't obsess about colors and fonts and logos and things like that. This was the page that you would initially hit. So I'd call it medium fidelity, like I said. And then once you clicked in, there was like a home page, and it had these little modules for all the different features. And if you clicked on one of these modules, it would go to a sub page. So we had about like 8 pages total in this little mini site prototype that we were testing. And in other talks, I go into more details of how I recruited users and things like that. I don't have time to do that here, but let me show the results. So bottom line, we recruited users, I facilitated them through the mock-ups and got feedback in person, Oprah style. And here's what we learned. Basically, here's the same chart now, color-coded with red, yellow, and green. Red means they just didn't like it at all, like either very confusing, just no appeal at all. Yellow meant there was like some lukewarm interest, but not real interest. Green meant there was some appeal, and we could tell there was some potential there. None of this was a slam dunk. Even the green ones, it wasn't like they're like, yeah, I definitely want that. We could just kind of see there was like a diamond in the rough if we could work through the issues. So the first thing is, hey, is there any green? Do we get any green? There's no guarantee you're gonna get green when you do this, right? So we were psyched that there was some green. That's the first thing that I saw. The second thing was, remember this was the core? No green in the core at all. Right? And this is what happens a lot of times. You hear about people pivoting and they go out with one idea and they talk to people and they learn about something else. That's exactly what happened here, right? This was just kind of these were side ideas from the core. Most importantly too is this thing was red. I didn't really get into the details of this. This was not well defined. We would have had to like come up with some had assigned some expensive third-party data licensing to get the data to compute the score. We had a bunch of engineers have to determine some algorithm and a lot of engineering effort to build this. Guess what? Because it's red, we can just cut all that fat because nobody wants it. So not only is it about finding green, it's also about cutting red and not building things that people don't want. So now we literally had to decide, okay, great, we have to pivot. We're going to pivot this way, or we're going to pivot this way. And we decided to pivot to the reduced junk mail for a few reasons. One is it was a better fit with the brand. Secondly, there were a lot of people already doing this one, and so it was hard to see how we were going to be differentiated. Plus, thirdly, it would have taken a lot of biz dev deals and taken a lot of time to execute. So we decided to go over here. So we threw out all of our prototypes. That's the beauty. We hadn't coded anything, so we didn't have any qualms about just starting fresh with a fresh blank slate. And then I had 8 pages of notes of everything we had learned, all the questions people had asked, all the concerns they had raised, things like that. And so we started from scratch and made a whole new prototype. And we pivoted to junk mail freeze. All about junk mail reduction, basically. And this is what I mean, too, by peeling the onion in the problem space. In hindsight, saying, hey, we're going to reduce your junk mail, that's like saying, I'm going to help you get within 100 miles of your house. It's very high level. So when we actually talked to people, got all this rich stuff, we learned that not all junk mail is created the same, right? What we learned is the ones that people really hate and really annoy them the most are the financial related ones. So things like cash advance checks and pre-approved credit card offers. And it made sense. We learned that most people, when you have a house, their mailbox isn't locked. Anyone can go in there and grab it. So they're afraid that someone's going to go in there and take those and do identity theft or mess up their credit rating or something like that. So once we learned that, we put that front and center on the new landing page. And when I tested it, people were kind of like silently nodding as they're reading. It was great. Other things too, like we said, hey, we're going to save trees. Several people said, well, how many trees are you going to save? So we're like, all right, we're going to save 43 trees. We put the number in there for them so they could see how many we're going to do. So all these little details, we went through those notes and made sure that anything that was confusing or that they didn't like, that we addressed. And we saw a fundamentally different response. Here, like I said, people were just kind of silently nodding the whole time. They still had some questions, of course. And, in the first time around, I was like, well, how is it going to work? I want to block the catalogs, but I got to get my Pottery Barn catalog. That's got to come through. So, we had some details about that, and we learned more details. But overall, it was a much better test. And there was something else that we asked, too. We asked, would you pay $10 a month for this? And the first time around, nobody had any interest in that. And the second time around, you always have to be a little careful asking people if they would pay because they don't have to bust out their wallet, but it was a marked difference. Pretty much everybody said, what they said is, hey, I'd have to try it out for 30 days, but if it did what this says, I would gladly pay you $10 a month. And then the other reason I know that we had come a long way too was after the test was done, like, great, here's your check for the hour of research, thank you so much. Every single person was like, so is this live now? Can I go use this now? Can I go to the site? I'm like, no, we're still building it. Sorry, it's not quite ready yet. Can I give you my email? Would you email me this when this came out? Nobody did that the first time, right? So we had really kind of iterated to a point where people liked what we had built. So that's the Oprah technique and an illustration of the Oprah technique. Now, once you launch, let's talk, I know the Spock people out there are like, where's my Spock, guys? I need a little Spock. I'm feeling very, I need some data and analytics. So once you launch, then you can get analytical. And you can do, even before that, in that middle stage, you can do what I call semi-quants, or quant-on-qual. There are ways to not worry about sample size and things like that. But let's get back to this core question of, okay, we've launched our product now. It's in market. If we can only do one metric that's going to measure our level of product market fit for our product, just one metric, what would it be? I'd love to hear people's thoughts about what they would do for the one metric. Just yell it out. Sales? Usage? NPS. What? Pay, dollars, dollar sign, make it rain. Okay, good. Referrals, retention, okay. Yeah, so these are all great answers. This is exactly the typical set of answers that I get. Sales, it's all about money. Obviously, if you're making money, you're successful. NPS, the one thing I love to say about NPS, I didn't have time, so I cut that slide. In the book, I talk about the difference between behavioral metrics and attitudinal metrics. If I say, would you recommend this to a friend or not? If I say, yeah, I would, you don't actually know if I did or not. So it's a good metric, don't get me wrong, but it's a behavioral metric. And I think in general, that's an attitudinal metric. I got it mixed up. That's an attitudinal metric because I'm saying what I would do. A behavioral metric is more powerful. It's like if you could somehow magically see if someone else said referrals, if you could see if they referred their friend, that would be more powerful. Someone said retention, and I think that is, for me, the retention rate is basically the catch-all. Because it basically, and for those of you that are not familiar with it, it tracks, hey, okay, of the people the customers that we had, what percentage stay active over time? And someone had said usage. That's another way of saying that. Sometimes people say engagement. But the reality is people don't come back to your site. And if your product is better, a higher percentage of people come back. If it's lower, a lower percentage of people come back. How many people here have tracked their retention rate for their products? We got a lot. Okay, cool. How many of you guys have done cohort analysis on it? Okay, a smaller subset. Cool. So let me show you how you typically track retention rate. And so this is, again, for the Spock side of how you achieve product market fit. You basically say, okay, by days since the first use by that user, or weeks or months, however you want to do it, like some time, what percentage of people have come back and used the product since then? And obviously in the day 0, it was 100%, but usually the drop off, the number of people that never come back is usually so high that you don't want to bother shrinking the graph by putting 100%. They just go ahead and start with the day 1 number, right? And this is pretty brutal. Look at this. This is a real retention curve. 80% of the people never come back again. This is from a mobile app. If those of you guys work in mobile, you know retention is brutal, right? Because you install the app, it goes on screen 12. Please let me put push notifications on, please, right? So you can come back. But if you don't, you're never going to wake up the next day and use it again. And then what happens is there's some slope, and eventually down here, it either flattens out asymptotically, or it actually goes to 0. For a lot of product, it actually goes to 0, which means eventually all those people you spent all that time and money and effort marketing just kind of eventually get out of the bucket. Now, what you want to do is you don't want to keep looking at this. When you first launch, this is fine, but if you've been in market for a while, you don't want to have all of your users in the same bucket because your retention could change over time. So you want to do cohort analysis, and this is basically where you look at different groups of users, and usually it's by time that they signed up. So you say, hey, let's take all the people that signed up in January, let's take all the people that signed up in February, all the people that signed up in March, and see how their retention curves compare. It may also be by marketing acquisition channel. Let's see who the SEO people are like, what the paid, PPC people are like. So let's do this real quick. Let's say we did some cohort analysis, and we had 3 cohorts. Cohort A is blue with the diamonds. Cohort B is red with the squares. Cohort C is green with the triangles. Let's just do a quick show of hands. Who would rather have cohort A for their business? Raise your hand. Who would rather have cohort B? Who wants cohort C? We got unanimity. This is awesome, right? How does your brain know? Why do you know that C is better? Because you don't really care about what all this noise is. You just care about this, right? That's all you care about is at the end of the day, where am I at? That right there, whatever that terminal value is when it flattens out, that is a quantitative measure of product market fit. That's it basically right there, right? So if you want to, you're Spock and you're like, Dan, I want to know exactly how I'm doing on product market fit, I'm not just talking to people Oprah style, that's how you do it. That's how you know what's going on, right? And what you hope to see is over time that your curve is moving up, right? Let's say we launch a product, this is showing retention curve months since sign up basically, and these are the, we say we launched our product 2 years ago. This is the first set of people that signed up when we launched our ugly V1 2 years ago, and that's the retention curve we had. We were holding on to maybe 5% of people after 12 months. And then we listened to people, and we tested, and we optimized, and we launched new features, we improved our value proposition. And then maybe the people from 18 months ago, the curve looks like that. And then we did the same thing for another 6 months, and then, so that's what you want to see, hopefully, is that over time, your retention curve is going up. Because again, that number, wherever it tails out, that's your measure of product market fit. I'm going to show you some real empirical data. This is from the Android store, basically Android apps, showing for the top 110, next 50, next 100, the retention curves. See that? It's exactly what you'd expect. The best apps have the highest terminal value here, right? They're holding on to like about 50% of people after 90 days, and then it just drops down. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. You can use that as a concept. And this is the Spock side. You don't know why your retention curve isn't where you want it to be. You need to go back to Qualitative to figure that out and do some tests, and you can do some A/B testing to optimize it. So again, you've got these 3 phases of your product. Phase 1 before it's live, where we're focusing on qualitative mainly. That's the Oprah side. Once you're live, you're using a mix of both qualitative and quantitative, and then after you've achieved product market fit, then you're mainly doing the quantitative. And so it's just, the main message here is there are Oprah techniques, there are Spock techniques, use the right one at the right time. To recap the lean product process, basically, starts off with getting a clear picture of who your target customer is, figuring out what their underserved needs are, figuring out how are you going to meet those needs in a way that's better or different than with the other products that are out there, specifying your MVP feature set, so again, you don't overbuild, and you can validate right away without going too far down the wrong path. Creating an MVP prototype to bring your feature set to life so you can actually test it with customers. Testing it with customers, and then iterating, going through that loop of hypothesize, design, test, learn, and improving product market fit, basically. So that's the time that I have, basically. I don't have time for questions, but I'll be around later. I'm happy to ask questions later or during the break. Thanks a lot.
I need some traction. You need some traction.